Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Stephen Carter. I'm the editorial director at iGaming Business, and I'll be moderating today's session. We're delighted to be hosting a webinar with Onfido today, looking at key learnings from FinTech and how to make compliance your competitive advantage. In this webinar today, James Hiller, who is Business Development Lead at Onfido, will be discussing how gaming can learn from other regulated industries and turn compliance into a competitive advantage. There'll be a Q&A session following the presentation, so please do submit questions as we go along. We'll try to address as many of them as possible in the allocated time. With that, I'm going to pass over to James to introduce himself. Over to you, James.
Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you very much for attending. As Steve said, this is going to be a learning from FinTech webinar and basically how to make compliance your competitive advantage. My name is James and I represent Onfido, who are a global identity verification technology provider. So what are we going to discuss today? Really, I think we're going to be focusing on three things. Number one, why the problems facing iGaming today are nothing new. Number two, the sort of secret sauce that we're going to call it for today that iGaming can learn from FinTech. And number three, how we can start thinking about the above in your business and how to really make that as powerful as possible for you. So just a quick snapshot to kind of start us off. Gaming in 2020, what are the challenges? Well, to be quite honest, it probably is a bit more wide-reaching than just these three things. But the three things that we're going to focus on today, and the three things I suppose that we can really help with, are fraud prevention, regulatory compliance, and customer experience. And I think from a fraud sort of prevention perspective, really what we're seeing is that there is more and more sophisticated types of frauds, account takeover, friendly fraud, etc., things like chargebacks. From a regulatory compliance perspective, it's quite a fragmented regulatory environment across the EU. Having worked closely with lots of different operators over the past year or two, it also seems as though there's not much clarity around how to actually be compliant, which is a problem. And number three, the customer experience and how actually players nowadays are very unloyal, and as if the experience of actually being able to use the account isn't what they would deem appropriate, they'll very happily change and move to somebody different. And actually, just to keep sort of topical, I suppose, I've just seen that today Mr. Green was hit with a £3 million fine for failing to have effective procedures in place, basically preventing harm and money laundering. So I suppose this is even more relevant now than it ever has been. So we've actually seen this all, I suppose, before. The interesting about the problems you're seeing is they've actually occurred before in a different industry, in the sort of the financial services industry, and that's something that Onfido has kind of seen firsthand with some of our clients. So I'm going to try and take you down sort of a trip down memory lane now, outlining how financial services disruptors, or fintechs as perhaps they're more commonly known, have sort of come about, and the journey that they have been on. So going back to financial services in 2012, London hosted the Olympics. I seem to remember. I'm a football fan. Spain won the Euros. And as a consumer, I think the bulk of my sort of financial world revolved around my relationship with my bank, which happens to have been NatWest. So these banks were more often than not branch-based. I might access them through their web portal or whichever jargon they might have been using back then, but the bulk of the important stuff was done one-to-one at a physical store. So the important stuff really looked like this. It was current accounts, go to my bank, get a credit card, went to my bank, sending money abroad, go to my bank, mortgages, any kind of personal lending, no matter what service it was, I went to NatWest and they did all of those things for me. If we fast forward to 2020, what we've seen is an explosion of these fintech operators. People like Revolut, Monzo, obviously very well known within the UK, people like Curve, Monese, LendInvest, Remitly, WorldRemit, TransferWise, have all come about over the last kind of sort of 3 or 4, 5 years, and have focused on one of a particular of these different services. So now you want to open up a current account. If you're an 18-year-old, 19-year-old, go to Monzo, go to Monese, go to Starling, all on my mobile, super easy. You want to get a credit card, go to Tandem, go to Revolut on your mobile. If you want to send money abroad, you can go to TransferWise or WorldRemit, all from the mobile. And what we've seen is that actually by getting that approach right on mobile and making it more attractive to the kind of people who are signing up for these accounts around the world, they've actually won and they've gained huge market share. And I suppose really the possibilities are endless. So I can just pull out my phone, type in banking, mortgage, insurance, see what comes to the top. And in every single one of those cases, there will be a mobile first or app driven experience, which makes it super easy for me to sign up for one of those accounts. No more applying for stuff online, then being asked to send something in via email, or even worse, having to physically actually go into a branch and do it. All from the mobile, all immediate, and all just simply using a document and being able to access my mobile phone. So, financial services in 2012, what did that look like? Well, the challenges really at the time were fraud prevention. At the time, they were experiencing a 60% increase in fraud attacks year on year. Absolutely incredible numbers, translating to over 20 billion in losses in 2012. From a regulatory compliance perspective, to be fair, the UK pretty much leads the way in terms of financial regulation with the steer of the FCA, but actually the rest of the EU, super fragmented, not too dissimilar to the different license operators within the EU for gaming. And then from a customer experience perspective, lots of 30% of customers not signing up due to a lack of trust or understanding how the procedures worked. It just wasn't clear enough, which actually put a lot of people off. So imagine you're a professional fraudster in 2012 and you're hearing about banks doing it all online from the ground up. You're rubbing your hands and thinking this is easy. And really, for a lot of the fintechs, that's something that they had to really try hard to navigate. So over the period from 2012 to about 2017, 2018, we saw highs of 60% increases in fraud year on year. And that's enough to kill pretty much any business. And it wasn't just sort of bad guys take IDs and open account fraud. It was impersonation fraud. It was mule accounts, instances of account taker through activities like social engineering, and due to the prevalence of information that we all hold on one another now online. So does that sound familiar? It should do. What we've got now is really sort of a very fragmented regulatory landscape, getting between you and winning in every single different market. So that might be fraud attacks from mule accounts, chargebacks, people trying to cheat new online systems, all the kind of stories that we hear all the time from compliance and operational staff at operators all over the world. You have the customer experience at the end of it all. How do I get the customer through the door and retained as quickly as possible without breaking the rules? It should all sound pretty familiar, and that's where gaming is at today. And it's a few years behind finance, we believe, when it comes to nailing down the road to adoption and how to really gain that market share. Ultimately, turning fraud customer experience into a competitive advantage. So, financial services in 2020, we think is a real success story. Here are sort of 3 success stories from our own customer base, of course, to just try and talk you through sort of how they've been able to navigate that landscape. So CoinFloor are an online trading platform. They've managed to reduce their fraud on their platform by 72% by making the most out of a technology-led approach. Bunk, a mobile-only current account provider, enabled themselves to onboard more users in a compliant way, actually being able to onboard 5 times the number of users versus the old way of doing things without needing to hire any more staff whatsoever. And Money Match, for those of you who don't know, are an online remittance service. They kind of leverage technology to navigate the demands local regulations put on their customer experience. Essentially, what we've managed to do is to turn a 15-minute call, going through quite a laborious process, into a not to registered verification process that takes less than 3 minutes. So they actually come from a very sort of effective process where actually they were already only doing it in 15 minutes, and we've managed to enhance that again by being able to save them $8 per user in terms of their sign-up journey and reduce that to just 3 minutes. And these are just a few examples of how fintechs have made compliance their competitive advantage, in this landscape. So on Fido, as we know, we work with a lot of them. So we saw the success of these fintechs, Monzo, Revolut, 2 of our major clients, who went from 0 market share in 2014 to dominating new account openings in the UK and Europe in 2019. They've put fear into the hearts of some of these big banks that have been operating for 150, 200 years, and showed that if you take the right approach, you can get the balance right of fraud reduction, compliance, and that customer experience, getting those 3 things working in harmony with one another. And really what they've done is to make sure that then sets them apart in what is, essentially a very crowded financial services space. So as an education piece, here are a couple of the specifics that financial services did to turn their problems in fraud, compliance, and that customer experience into solutions. And if you're reading these problems and thinking that's me, then you really aren't alone there. What we're going to do now is take a look at what the transformation within finance looks like, and then turn it to how that would work for you. So let's start with fraud. On the left is where financial service providers and fintech started out in 2012 and the problems that essentially caused them. And on the right is how providers solve these problems in a market-leading way. I'll run through a couple of these sort of in turn. So an over-reliance on databases. In gaming especially, and I'm an avid sports gambler or gamer, we live and die by databases. They're the cheapest and easiest way to tick a compliance box and get a customer through the door. I know that, you know that. But as I've mentioned earlier in the presentation, they're exclusive and they're quite easy to exploit. Within reason, I could quite easily impersonate the vast majority of my friends and family and open up accounts in their names. And I'm sure most people on this call could do the exact same thing. Also exclusive in that customers with thin credit files can't get through the door. That's some students, migrants, and a whole younger crop of players. The world's getting smaller. The UK in particular is probably one of the most diverse countries on the planet, and there's people from all over the world living and working here. Exploitable also in that they're prone to breaches. In fact, actually, the other day, reading the US government advised against databases as an authentication method because they've seen sort of so much fraud in relation to social security numbers that are too easy to basically get hold of and use in the wrong way. So nowadays, and I'm sure you've all been through the sign-up flows for Monzo and Revolut, etc., they verify real-world identities such as an ID document and a biometric, essentially a picture of your face, instantly. No more best guessing, just best practices the whole way through. Online methods for online products, and I suppose really what we're talking about here is just the difficulty in how you can't actually physically hold the identity document in your hand. And so what we're trying to do here is, by deferring to those technologies, we're actually able to ask people to verify real life documents, capture and verifying information live, as opposed to people being able to send things in later on, have the ability to kind of doctor and change documents to suit them, and actually then be able to get round some of these processes. And then in terms of attacks from different angles, and this is becoming more and more prevalent, of course, things like money mules, chargebacks, account takeover, sign-up bonus abusers, the list goes on. Day in, day out, fintechs will be struggling against this, having manual teams to review, or worse, actually just not being able to deal with it, and so doing no checks at all. And I know that there are some compliance teams in the gaming world who also are overrun with these issues and who just can't handle the amount of work that they are required to do, especially on the budget that they're given. So poorly trained fraud reviewers have been shown in studies to have actually up to about a 50% error rate on detecting ID fraud alone. The mind gets tired, you start making easier decisions, and you stop thinking about what you're doing. And basically, in the end, this costs businesses with small margins big money. There's not huge margins in gaming, as we all know, so actually these problems can cause big problems for the operators and ultimately can kill businesses, which is something that you obviously do not want to happen, particularly in the early stages. So nowadays, these providers use risk engines, not just risk people. And that's the clear thing we're talking about here. It's risk engines, not just more people. Processing thousands upon thousands of documents every day by combining a database check with transaction monitoring, with device analytics, and with a verified user identity. Basically taking the risk out and empowering the business to fend off bad actors right from the very start. So, and the same goes for user experience. And I suppose this bit from the experience perspective is key. An analog experience for digital users. To capture a new generation of users and to win market share, fintechs had to move away from thinking about doing what we did in store. It just doesn't work. But put it on a web browser. No, it needs to be different. Customers expect much more than that now, and they've cottoned on much quicker. And nowadays, I'm going to point to a business like, I don't know, Revolut here. They're innovating what a banking experience looks like. It's intuitive, it's built from the ground up for a mobile experience, and a lesson that gaming can take away for sure is departing the mindset of in-store but on web and thinking about that mobile-first, younger generation approach. Putting profit before protections, something of a contentious point perhaps, but financial technology also recognised that a good experience isn't actually always the fastest experience. In an old world, all friction was seen as bad. and minimal checks, blockers, etc. were put in place. This meant that money mules and other vulnerable people could get through and into the product. Not good. Nowadays, profit and protection are closer to kind of being equal, I would call, if not on par. Companies see that protecting the user enables them to build a defensible brand and actually stand out. That's why you see industry-wide regulations such as strong customer authentication pop up, or company-specific things like Monzo's merchant self-exclusion, which I know that they use actually for gaming, pop up. And user experience isn't just a get me from A to B fast. It's also about helping the customer on that journey and putting them first. Make them feel loved, make them feel like it's a really enjoyable experience for them. And finally, regulation and compliance. So I suppose really what we think before, it was very much a local mindset with a global approach. And what I mean by that is in attempting to conquer all markets at once, but not sufficiently building for local or niche regulations and policymakers, from the FCA to BaFin in Germany, borders became burdens for financial institutions, not really an opportunity. Companies would try and expand, then basically withdraw services all of a sudden, picking up fines along the way because they tried and they couldn't do it. And we see a lot of similar things happening in gaming, of course, as well. Nowadays, fintechs are a bit smarter with what they're doing. They generally take a very much a global mindset with a localized approach, basically actively working with local regulators to plan and build for a future of financial regulation rather than waiting to see what happened next. Not enough data, not enough quality. We've seen this in fintechs, largely driving by compliance functions, moving from traction and willful ignorance to nowadays building with accountability in mind, opting for transparent tooling, full reporting, auditing, and everything that's associated. So the secret sauce, it starts with identity. So I think really identity is the core solution to the three forces we've spoken about previously. Identity lets you know who's coming through the door so you can catch bad actors. Identity is how you stay ahead of the complex regulatory landscape, of course. And identity is also how you effectively get the good people through the door and give them a good experience through the player journey. Traditional ways of doing identity, like databases, we don't believe are any longer meeting these sort of challenges, meeting these requirements. I suppose really the increasing dramatic breaches mean that they don't stop impersonation fraud or friendly fraud, and they also mean you can't onboard with thin credit file individuals. They're also starting to become more outdated from a regulatory perspective, as different geographies are starting to implement stronger rules, as you all know. And they also mean that because you've never anchored to an account to a real identity, I suppose, you can't truly trust that user down the line. So actually they have a worse player experience, you know, and ultimately that's what we're trying to change. So the secret sauce with Onfido, we really think looks a bit like this. New generation identity services will catch impersonation and friendly fraud because you're anchoring users to a government issued ID, and if needed, also a biometric of the applicant's or the customer's face. And this means that if someone does act fraudulently, your fraud team have very definitive information to work from. That's the important thing. It's more robust from a regulatory perspective, and this means you have a full audit trail. You can present to your regulators exactly what you've done, fully tracked, to ensure that you are compliant and they're happy with the processes that you've implemented to ensure you're following the right regulation and you're protecting the player. And it can mitigate friction at sign up, and this bit I really want to focus on, by using autofill technology to reduce keystrokes or tap-ins to sign up. Plus, because the account is anchored to a real-life document, you can use biometrics to recheck if it is them at high-risk moments. For example, I've heard stories from different compliance chaps at different operators, who I won't mention right now, of trying to check whether a 60-year-old woman who'd only ever bet on bingo was really suddenly betting £1,000 a game on a Singapore under-18s game on a Monday morning at 7 AM. and trying to work out if it was really them, and spending huge amounts of time and effort trying to contact them to try and verify if that account had been taken over. And I really use that as obviously an exaggerated example, but I think everyone on the call will probably appreciate that there are times where you think, actually this is strange activity, we need to investigate this. And I think we all know that actually your resources are limited. by using a government issue ID at its inception, and also then being able to have a biometric to compare against that at any stage in the customer lifecycle, means that actually you can do those checks automatically, efficiently, and very, very effectively with almost no difficulty at all. So what does it look like? Well, it looks a little bit like this. And for those of you who've signed up for people like Revolut and Monzo and Monese, etc., you'll have probably seen this before. But the user experience typically involves kind of 3 screens. So the first screen is where we ask for the customer to provide their document. Pretty simple. They take a photograph of their driver's license, their ID card, their passport, whatever government issue document they've got. It doesn't matter which document they've got, we can then verify its authenticity. Secondly, we can then pre-populate those forms. So appreciating that people want to get betting as fast as possible, often actually having to go through a difficult form can put people off, and it can actually disrupt that player sign-up journey. So actually, let's populate it for them automatically. Just extract the data from the document and inject it into that flow. And then thirdly, if required, and only if, we can also ask for a biometric at sign-up. You don't have to, but what that will do, it will anchor that person to that document, ensuring that I haven't borrowed my brother's document or my friend's document to open an account, of course, and that it truly is me who's signing up for that account at that point of inception. So create different flows based on different signals. And I suppose what we really mean here is actually you can customize this. You haven't got to adopt a single approach for every different market, for every single customer. You can customize it based on the risk profile that's associated to the individual, based on the country, based on anything that you particularly want to judge it by. And if they're deemed low risk, you might just choose a document first and then do a database check for your PEPs and sanctions, for example, just to ensure that, of course, they're not on any of those lists. And if they're high risk, you might then say, well, actually, we'll do a biometric check as well to link them to the document so you know they're not presenting a stolen ID. And there might be different geographies where that's more important than others. So they're just showing you a very simple flow as to how that would look. And because I suppose you're anchoring it to a document, or in either way, what you're really doing is your risk signals can tell you if an account might have been compromised. And this is the big thing here. Say a player wants to recover their account, which would typically mean a help desk call or something similar, you know, an email or a series of events. You could just trigger a selfie to that individual and say, hi, James, we just want to make sure it's still you. Ask the person to conduct a selfie, which can be either a photo or a short video on their phone, to ensure that that person is still in control of that same account. Because you've got that government issued document to anchor it against, you can quickly see, yes, it's the same person, that person's verified, and then they get access to their account immediately, saving all that time and effort and cost in order to regain access. So that kind of summarizes, I suppose, what we want to try and to cover today. Hopefully, there'll have been some questions asked throughout the webinar. If you've got any questions that you would like to ask, please use the questions tab, I think, on the GoToMeeting link, and hopefully I'll be able to run through some of those now. But thank you very much so far for listening.
Thank you, James, for a great presentation. Can't have time to address some questions from the audience. To our listeners, please continue to send through any questions you may have, and we'll address as many as possible. I'm just going to kick one off, actually. I mean, you touched on it at the start, James. I mean, from 2012 to the current day, obviously all the solutions and ways we've got of detecting and preventing fraud have developed exponentially, yet we're still seeing failings in this area when it comes to identification. I think that Mr. Green, the report from the Gambling Commission, Mr. Green, I think there was evidence, wasn't there, that Mr. Green accepted a 10-year-old a claims payout, a source of funds proof, and also a photograph of a laptop screen. I mean, why is this still happening when all this technology is, all these sort of advanced solutions are at people's fingertips? Why are we still seeing so many incidences, James?
We think it's largely due to a sort of scaredness around changing what customers are used to. So I kind of referenced that I like sports betting, and because I've lived at my house for quite some time, because I'm 35, I've lived in this country my whole life, I'll always get through on a kind of a database lookup. And the vast majority of customers can do and will do. So for simplicity, and probably also for cost, it actually makes it much easier to just say, yeah, that person exists, and allow them to sign up. The problem is, of course, that that actually is very easy now for someone to manipulate or to use someone else's details. You know, if it wasn't in 2012, it certainly is now. There's so much information about everybody available online. You can quite easily impersonate someone different. And so what we think is that actually the game industry is, as you said, a little bit behind the financial services space in terms of wanting to approach that much more robust check at, I suppose, sign up or at a registration in order to confirm that that really is the person that you're dealing with. The advantages in, I suppose, in our opinion and in the financial services world are huge. Once you have anchored an account to a document and to a person, actually it takes a huge amount of the risk out of it. There's actually less cost in continuing to operate that account, and ultimately it means that from a compliance perspective, you are sure that you are dealing with the right person from the start. And so actually across Europe, we've seen that many operators are adopting that document at inception or document at registration journey. In the UK, it's very much seen as a backup. You know, if someone were to fail the identity record check, then we'll do it. And so what you've got is the vast majority of people being able to get on that and operate an account with almost minimal checks, and actually then that causes more problems later in the line, which could be one of the reasons that the regulators are then clamping down on sort of the lack of process or lack of clarity and issuing fines, not just of course to Mr. Green, but to a whole host of different operators around the country.
Okay, thanks, James. Got a question in from Brett. As we're asked to verify the player's age and POA, what does
proof of address.
Yeah, place of address. Does this fall within the guidelines to only use one form of ID?
So sorry, what's the question? Can they only use one?
Well, as we're asked to verify the player's age and place of address, does this fall within the guidelines? Is it sufficient just to use only one form of ID for that? Is what Brett is asking.
I don't know. Honestly, I don't know. So I suppose you could, if it is a proof of address, you could use a document such as a UK driver's license that has a proof of address, or has an address on it. But I suppose you would need to double check with your particular regulator. I don't know which regulator they're referring to as to whether or not that would be sufficient. I think an ID record check clearly confirms that a person of a certain name, of a certain date of birth and a certain address exists, and that at the moment is sufficient. So that would lead me to believe that if you were to provide a document with the name, address and date of birth, such as a driver's license, then that would fall within the regulations and therefore would make you compliant. I would double check that, but it would make sense that you could do all of the checks in one, only using a document with address on it, of course.
Okay, thanks, James. There's sort of way of a sort of follow-up from Tufan actually has asked, how long does it take to verify a driving license in person during the sign-up process?
It's a good question. It's not an exact science, but the Onfido solution comes in what we would refer to as a hybrid methodology, meaning that we use technology first with a sort of a human team to back that up. So the vast majority of documents that are genuine, of course, and that we can capture, or the customer can capture on their phone in good light without their thumbs over the data and the usual sort of silly mistakes that humans make, we're actually able to verify the vast majority of those what we would call automatically, so machine-led, and that would take 10 to 15 seconds, so very, very quickly. For those edge cases where perhaps it's an old document, it's a bit tired looking, it's got folds, creases, coffee stains on it, or where there's anything about it that the machine can't read, we would then automatically refer that to a human document specialist who sits on the Onfido side, and they would then manually approve that. That comes with a global global SLA of up to 5 minutes. The vast majority of documents are processed in under 2 minutes, though. So either instant up to 5, with an average of 2 would probably be the numbers that I'm comfortable sharing.
Okay, thanks, James. Another question actually on from Brett again. There was a mention during the presentation on identifying a person's credit levels. They're working out what they can afford, affordability checks. I mean, how does this work? He's put in brackets thin credit file as well. So I think if there's a thin credit file on somebody, how do you assess what they can afford, affordability and credit level?
So this is not an affordability check. So just to be absolutely clear for anyone on the call, Onfido does not provide affordability check solutions. What we provide is identity verification solutions. What I was referring to is that say someone moved here from Spain today, and they like betting on football, so they think, do you know what, I'm going to open up an account with one of the many different sportsbook operators in the UK. They won't be able to open up an account using just their name, address and date of birth because they don't exist in the UK. It wouldn't be possible. Similarly, if someone had just turned 18, it's unlikely that they'll have a credit file that would be sufficient enough to match or to be confirmed using the traditional method of a identity record check or a database check, as we refer to it as, where you can just use those 3 pieces of data. So in both of those examples, you would then need to do something different, or you would simply fall out of the registration flow and you wouldn't be able to sign up. So by using a document at that stage, clearly you are then allowing those people to onboard. But what you're having to do is have a disjointed process where some people can do one thing and others have to do something very different. By going for a document first approach, which is clearly what we discussed, what you're actually doing is you're allowing anyone who has a government issue, authentic, genuine document to be able to access services that they are legally entitled to, or that the operator would like to provide to them. So irrespective of age, nationality, or how long they've been living in a particular country, they would be able to get access to a new account.
Thanks, James. Another one as well, this one is from Jim. He sort of asked, to what extent is the success of Monzo and Revolut simply them cherry picking a demographic or a use to the technology, rather than having a generally friction-free alternative?
That's interesting. So I think Monzo and Revolut, what they've done brilliantly, to be fair, is they've gone after that's probably a younger generation. So I'm 35. I happen to have an account with Revolut, but I use it for travel. So for me, it was the ability to use the card abroad. But they've definitely gone for people who are looking for their first bank account. And I suppose, when I was younger, I don't know if people on the call, I physically went to the bank that I wanted to open an account with. I took down some documents. I probably went down there with my mum, knowing me, and tried to do it, in store. You try and ask a 17, 18-year-old to do that today, and they won't be interested. So what they've done is they've realised that they're not making, new 35-year-olds. What they're doing is they're making lots of new people who want to open up accounts at 17, 18, and want to get access to stuff as an adult. And so they very successfully targeted that particular demographic to gain huge market share. But equally, by making sure that the process was simple, intuitive, and actually very easy for someone with a short attention span to be able to open up an account and get access to services, that's then opened up the market to all manner of people. So actually Revolut, whilst they perhaps do very well with the younger generation, they also do very well with businesses, with people who travel a lot, with an older generation. My mum actually got a card the other day because she's going to America, on holiday. So it was about getting it right for the audience that was going to have the highest adoption rate, and then using those learnings and using those best practices in order to then be effective across the market, irrespective of age, gender or nationality.
Lost it. Can't hear him.
Are you back?
Yeah, I can hear you now, James. Sorry, it just dropped out for a second there.
Okay.
Apologies for that. Okay, I've got a question from Sergei, who's asked, does all this work on a desktop version of a site still? Because obviously you've talked a lot about mobile today.
Yeah, it absolutely does. So although I didn't focus on it for today because we obviously had a shorter amount of time, all of the Onfido solutions work across any device, any type of journey. So just for example, many of the the companies we work with, in financial services, in gaming, in travel, in car hire, whichever, will obviously have a huge amount of active users on a desktop journey. For those going through a desktop journey, you've then got a couple of options. Either you can allow them to upload a document if they've got one saved on their desktop in their file system or hard drive, or what you can do, which is even better, is you can create a kind of a cross-device flow where if I'm signed up to a new account on my laptop and it then asks me to provide an image of my document and I don't have one saved, I can quickly pull my driver's license out of my wallet and then just ask the journey to carry on very quickly on my mobile, essentially creating a temporary journey, a temporary session on your mobile device, which you can generate using a QR code via a text message in a very simple way, which just basically quickly powers the phone to be able to take the photograph of the document, the image of the face, submit them using your phone because it's convenient, it's got a high-powered camera on it, of course, and then carry on your journey on your desktop. So that's something that's actually sort of been in operation for about 3-4 years now and is super effective for those companies who generally have a high amount of traffic, a high amount of sign-up still going through their desktop as opposed to perhaps their mobile. So the answer is absolutely yes.
Thanks, James. I just want to sort of touch on the biometrics and emerging technologies more broadly. I mean, what sort of, this is a part of your offer, a key part of your offering now. I mean, what's the take-up levels of biometrics now amongst the consumers, and what share of them are actually using it?
So within financial services, we're seeing it grow and grow and grow. So I think it would be fair to say that that probably 3-4, even as recent as 3-4 years ago, actually most financial institutions would just ask for a document. They would, but ultimately what that created was a situation where, yes, a genuine document was being used, so that solved part of the problem, but it didn't solve the second half, which is, was that really that person's document who was operating the account, or had they just borrowed it from someone different or stolen it, or whatever they might have done? And so we first saw an adoption of, let's call it a selfie, a sort of a static photo, if you like, of the person's face. And that became kind of very popular around about sort of 3 years ago. And people or customers the world over have become very familiar, of course, now with, I'm going to open a new account, they're going to ask me for a document, and then they're probably going to say, right, let's just make sure it's you and take a selfie. How that's then developed is actually to provide a more robust challenge to ensure that that person truly is that individual and there's definitely no untoward activity happening. There's now advancements in that selfie that could be a small video. We refer to it as liveness, and that liveness video allows the person to quickly look into their screen. Essentially, we take a biometric of their face, they turn their head left or right, which allows us to create a 3D image of the person's head and confirm that it's not a piece of paper or a photo or a mask or something like that. And then lastly, they read out a 3-digit number. So the combination of that biometric, the turning of the head, and the 3-digit number allow us to provide a short, robust challenge that confirms that person really is the one in the document and they really are signing up for that account there and then. Where we've seen it effectively used thereafter is on some of our perhaps on insurance sites and some of our travel sites where someone might perform a particular transaction and actually they already know that the account belongs to Jane Tiller, so they can just activate that facial check, be it liveness or photo at a latter stage, and just confirm that it's still them. So it's been a kind of a steady journey. But now in 2020, we see the vast majority of clients asking for a document and face because you can just do so much more with it once you've done that in terms of reducing fraud, reducing friction, and ultimately being able to reuse that biometric at a latter stage in the journey to empower your compliance teams to get things done faster and with more efficiency.
Thanks, James. We've got another one from Jim, actually. He says, although it was stated that the liveness check is optional, given the other comment about the easy availability of compromised documents, doesn't this make the liveness check mandatory?
It really depends. We believe as a business on Fido that the liveness check will become so prevalent the world over that actually customers will become very, very used to it, and it certainly makes it more robust. It certainly does, but there could be sort of a situation where you might want to walk before you can run. And so we have seen many businesses, actually, or many industries as well, first kind of move from what we would call a traditional, database check, the sort of more archaic 20-year-old system where we just use simple pieces of data to confirm someone's identity, moving to a document, and then potentially then adding sort of the face or the liveness check at sort of a latter stage. So although we believe the most robust combination, of course, is to do both the document and the liveness, for example, we do see sort of varying degrees of adoption based on, and you'll know your audience better than us, particular demographics. So just for example, you might say the UK is a very sophisticated market where customers in general are very familiar with using the document and a video to sign up for an account, in which case the adoption will be high, the friction will be low, and it will be easy to adopt. Conversely, you might say, well, actually in other markets, there wouldn't be that same high adoption from a video perspective. Do we want to implement that? And so you need to get the balance right. Ultimately, we think the whole world is moving that way, but it will be very dependent on how you feel it would fit with a particular market or demographic.
Okay, thanks, James. I think we're coming to the end of the questions that have come in, actually. So I'm just wondering if this is now your you've got your moment now. I think if anyone is out there got something they want to ask James, I think now is the time. I just sort of I actually want to just retouch on biometrics a minute as well, because maybe it's just a bit my kind of focus here. But so in terms of biometrics, are you kind of in terms of its take up and it becoming sort of more effective and influential in the world that you work in? Isn't it to some extent it's contingent upon the device makers and the handset makers and how they bundle this with devices? I mean, what share of handset maker, what sort of share of devices is now being bundled with? Is it something that's going to become bundled with every device at some point? So or is it still quite a niche thing?
No, not at all. No. I think it would be a fair comment to say that the vast majority of phones built today come with a sort of a front-facing camera where you can take a selfie. So providing there is the technology on the device, then the Onfido solution can work with it. So we have SDKs or software development kits for web, for iOS, and for Android-enabled devices, which covers, of course, the vast majority of the world's device market share. And for those people who perhaps even want to do cross-device flow, it doesn't even need to download an app. You can just empower whichever browser the customer has set as default. It simply is just using the technology already installed on the device to try and create an experience which makes it nice and simple to use. So from the biometric perspective, a selfie is a selfie, it's a photo, okay? But from the liveness, what we're really saying is just take a short video using that camera. The quality of the cameras that are installed on devices over the past 2, 3, 4 years are so high that ultimately you then create a very high quality video, and then using that video we can then quickly run the required test to ensure that from a biometric perspective that person's makeup of their physical face matches the one that's from the document. And in regards to that liveness test, just asking them to complete those 2 short tasks, the turning of the head and the reading of a 3-digit number, within reason, a 4-year-old could do that. It's not meant to be difficult. What it's meant to be is impossible to prepare for. You don't know what combination those 2 actions are going to come in, and you certainly don't know which 3-digit number you're going to read out. And so what we're trying to do is to make sure that that challenge is robust enough that actually it becomes much more difficult for people to circumnavigate those initial account registry checks, and you're tying that authenticated document to that person's face. Ultimately, all of it's around trying to empower these compliance teams to be able to do much more with that person's identity moving forwards, save time, save money, and then create that better experience for the customer at sign up, so that they're not going back to them and asking for additional documents. Can you email it in? Can you do this at a later stage? You can get it done early and save you a lot of time and effort moving forwards.
Thanks, James. I've got another one from Jim actually. Have you got anything that links identity to payment instrument, such as a debit card or bank account?
We don't at the moment, unfortunately. No, we are sort of at the moment steering clear of anything to do with payment details, payment cards, etc. Very much focusing on the sort of the identity piece. So at the moment, there isn't something that does that. So I realise that, of course, that is required for a lot of the operators and a lot of the markets. Unfortunately, at the moment, we focus very much on making sure we get that identity piece right, not on the payment card associated to the account. But I suppose by confirming that the account is truly in the name of, of James Hiller, for example, it then perhaps makes that easier to confirm that the card isn't stolen. So we help indirectly with it, but not directly in terms of the solution.
Thanks, James. I've got Brett is back. He's asked, is this already in place within the iGaming world? Has a casino implemented this already? Can I visit a casino to see how the onboarding model works and how efficient it is?
There certainly are clients using this already. I'll tell you one of my clients. Football Index, for those of you who are familiar with Football Index, are using this solution already. There are many others, but this is one of my customers. So we have enabled them to use our document and facial biometric check upon registration. So although you may not have an account with them, you can obviously sign up and you could actually see that process in place. In terms of physical casinos, this very much is an online journey, of course, so there aren't any, but there are other sort of sites using document and facial verification at sign up. So it's certainly something you can experience. I would argue, just in terms of sort of trying to generate that journey, you've got kind of two options. One, use someone's detail, or ask someone who isn't going to pass an identity record to go through that journey, because otherwise you'll simply get through straight off the cuff. And secondly, if you are going to attempt to sign up, perhaps deliberately provide misinformation to see if that will then generate a document check, because unfortunately, as we said, the problem is that the vast majority of operators, you will simply get through by using the right information, because they will just use a database check. It's only once you don't that you would actually then generate that document and facial similarity check. So if you want to check it out, Football Index would be the client that I'd say check out, and I think you can sign up for an account for free with those guys, so perhaps try there.
Thanks, James. I'll follow up from Brett as well. What database is the ID checked against, and would that be compliant with the GB Gambling Commission regulations for the purposes of KYC?
So the actual document isn't checked against an identity database. So as an example, let's use the UK passport. So UK passport, we don't have access, nor does any commercial organisation in the world have access to the UK passport database. It simply isn't provided, nor is it for the vast majority of documents issued the world over. What we're doing is we're using our knowledge, our intelligence of all of those documents that we support, of which there are 4,500 around the world, in order to confirm that that document matches what it should look like and that there hasn't been any manipulation of it. So essentially, Onfido Intelligence is that we understand what the document looks like first and foremost. We then increase our learning of each document by using machine learning and artificial intelligence, so that we're able to process en masse millions of documents per month, knowing that that document completely matches what it should look like, but it isn't connected to a database as such. What you can then do, though, and what many of our operators do, is they'll then use the data extracted from the document, knowing that it's genuine and knowing the document hasn't been falsified in any way, to then run, for example, your PEPs and sanctions check, which is required. So once you've confirmed that it really is James Hiller, that he really was born on that day and that he really lives at that address, that then means that you're checking the right details in order to be compliant. Where you might have a situation where someone's using falsified information, in which case you're running a PEP and sanctions check on someone who doesn't even exist, which is largely a waste of time, because there won't be a match. And so you can also, and many of our customers do, run those additional sort of AML checks or KYC checks in terms of PEPs and sanctions, adverse media, etc., through Onfido, having confirmed that the document is genuine, although that is a separate service. The actual document check is purely confirming that the document is true and the facial biometric confirms that the person's face matches that's in the document.
Thanks, James. I think we're just drawing to the end of our slot now. I think sort of what we have time for today. So thank you very much again to James and Onfido for joining us and sharing your insight. Today's webinar has been recorded and be available to listen on demand shortly for you to sort of rewatch and share with your colleagues. Otherwise, we'll see you soon. Also got an extra little bit of news as well. I've been informed here that Onfido will also be appearing at ICE North America in New Orleans, May 13th to 14th. So for more information on the event, visit icenorthamerica.com, and feel free to get in touch with Onfido to book some time on site. Thank you very much, James, and hope to see you, as many of you, back here as possible future webinars. Thank you very much. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Sorry.